Let's talk about something that's quietly set to change, well, pretty much everything about how we live our lives online and off: the digital ID. On the surface, it sounds amazing, right? A future where everything's simpler, faster, more secure. But with any powerful new tech, there's always a catch. And the catch here is a big one, raising huge questions about privacy, government, and control.
And really, it all boils down to this one question. In our rush for more convenience, how much control are we okay with giving away? See, a digital ID isn't just a fancy new driver's license on your phone. It's a fundamental piece of infrastructure. And it offers this incredible efficiency on one hand, but on the other, it opens the door to a level of surveillance and social sorting we've never seen before. It really is the ultimate double-edged sword. Okay, let's get into it.
So here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to look at that double-edged sword, the good and the bad of digital ID. Then, and this is super important, we'll break down the difference between authentication and identification. After that, we'll look at some real-world proposals that feel a lot like a profiling playbook. Then we'll see how this tech can actually make inequality worse. And finally, we'll talk about what comes next for our privacy.
All right, so let's start with the big why. Why are governments all over the world pouring billions into developing these systems? Well, it's not happening in a vacuum. They're being sold as the silver bullet for some very real, very frustrating problems that have popped up as our lives have become more and more digital. I mean, think about it. These systems are a direct answer to some of the biggest headaches of modern life. You got the mind-numbing efficiency of dealing with government agencies that are still stuck in the paper age. Then there's that constant worry in the back of your mind about online fraud, or worse, identity theft, which can completely wreck a person's life. So digital ID comes along and says, hey, I can fix all that. I can be the one secure key to your entire complicated digital world. And when you look at all the reasons, you can see why it's so appealing. I mean, we're talking about finally modernizing how we get government services. We're talking about a serious tool to fight back against scammers and cybercriminals. It could even make things like verifying your age to buy a lottery ticket online way more private, without having to flash your entire driver's license. And then, of course, there's the money. We're talking billions, with a B, in potential savings for governments and banks. The incentives to get this done are just massive. But, and this is a huge but, for all those shiny benefits, a whole lot of people are skeptical. A recent survey from Canada's Privacy Commissioner found that 65% of Canadians, that's nearly 2/3 of us, feel like they have little to no control over how the government is using their personal information. That is a massive trust problem. It's this feeling that once we hand our data over, it just vanishes into a black box, used in ways we never agreed to. And that feeling is coloring this entire debate. Okay, so to really get a handle on the risks we're talking about, we need to understand one single core concept. Seriously, if you take one thing away from this, make it this. It's the difference between authentication and identification. It sounds technical, but I promise, it's the key to everything.
All right, so authentication is small, it's simple, it's focused. The best example is buying a drink at a bar. All the bartender needs to know is one thing: are you old enough? They don't need to know your name, where you live, or your exact birthday. A system that just gives a simple yes or no to the question, is this person over 19? That's authentication. It's designed to protect your privacy because it only shares the absolute minimum piece of information needed.
Identification, on the other hand, is the whole shebang. This is when you show your passport to a border agent. They aren't just checking one little fact about you. They are asking a much, much bigger question. Who exactly are you? And to answer that, you're handing over your full name, your photo, your date of birth, your nationality, a rich, detailed profile of your entire official identity.
And seeing them side by side like this just makes it so clear. Authentication proves one fact. Identification reveals your entire self. One is targeted, the other is broad. One is built to preserve your privacy, the other is, by its very nature, invasive. Now, the big promise of a good digital ID system is that it would lean heavily on authentication. The big fear is that we end up with a lazy system that just defaults to identification for everything, turning every little interaction into a full identity check.
This quote just nails it. Think of your identity as this big circle. It's everything about you. Authentication is like taking out one tiny, specific slice of that pie to share, like, is a licensed driver. That's all someone needs to know. But identification? Well, that's like handing over the entire pie. The goal should be to have a system that lets us control which slice gets shared and when.
So, keeping that idea, authentication versus identification, in your head, let's look at a couple of real-world proposals that have been floated in Canada. Because these systems don't just blur that line we just talked about, they pretty much try to erase it completely, turning a tool of convenience into a machine for surveillance.
So check this out. This is from a pilot program called the Known Traveler Digital Identity, or KTDI. Now, the first bit is pretty standard stuff, what you'd find on a passport. But then it gets interesting. You're encouraged to volunteer all this other information to boost your credibility. Stuff like your travel plans, who you're with, even your health status, like vaccination records. This isn't just identification anymore. This is profiling. And that's the real kicker. A system like this moves way beyond just proving you are who you say you are. It's designed from the ground up to create a dynamic profile of you, an ever-changing trustworthiness score. You're basically being nudged to give up more and more of your private data to prove you're a good, low-risk person. It's a system designed to judge you.
And if you thought that was a lot, it gets wilder. Another proposal, part of something called the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, suggested capturing not just who you are, but how you behave. We're talking biometrics, sure, like fingerprints, but also behavioral data that your phone could quietly collect in the background. How fast you type, how hard you press the screen, even the unique rhythm of your walk. This is about constant, passive verification. It's about creating a permanent digital fingerprint of your most subtle habits.
Now, these incredibly powerful systems don't just exist in a tech bubble. They get dropped into the real world, a world that already has deep inequalities in wealth, education, and access to technology. So let's look at how a complex digital ID system, instead of helping everyone, could actually make those divisions even deeper.
You know, when we hear digital divide, we usually think about who has a smartphone and who doesn't. But the real divide goes much deeper. It's about skills. And this data is fascinating because it shows a clear link between a kid's digital skills and their parents' education level. Look at that. For something as basic as using a search engine, there's a 22-point gap. For opening an email attachment, it jumps to a 27-point gap. This is about digital literacy, which is often tied to someone's social and economic background.
And this is exactly where the risk is. So what happens when you lay a super complex, data-hungry digital ID system on top of that existing skills gap? Well, if you suddenly need to navigate a complicated app just to get your government benefits or even apply for a job, people with lower digital skills, who are often seniors, new immigrants, or people from lower-income families, could get left behind or even locked out completely. It could create a kind of digital caste system.
Okay, I know this can all start to sound a little terrifying, like we're all on some unstoppable conveyor belt to a surveillance state, but here's the good news. The story of digital ID isn't over. Not by a long shot. How these systems are actually built and rolled out is still very much up for grabs. And it turns out, public pushback is an incredibly powerful tool.
And these aren't just hypotheticals. These are real victories. In Germany, a huge public debate led to their national digital ID being totally voluntary. In Japan, citizens fought back against tying digital ID to healthcare because they were worried it would stop people from getting care. And check this out. Right here in Canada, the government of Saskatchewan hit the brakes on their digital ID plan back in 2022, and they said it was a direct result of privacy concerns they heard from the public. So, speaking up clearly works.
So at the end of the day, technology itself isn't good or bad. What matters is what we do with it. And the future of digital ID is going to be shaped by three things. First, the design choices we demand, pushing for systems that favor privacy-preserving authentication. Second, the laws we put in place to govern them, with really strict limits on how our data can be used. And maybe most importantly, how engaged we all are as citizens in making sure these tools work for us, not the other way around.
Which really brings us back to that core question. Let's be honest. These systems are coming. The pull of convenience is just too strong. So the challenge for us isn't to stop it, but to shape it, to stay involved, ask the tough questions, and demand that these powerful new tools are built to serve us, the citizens, to enhance our freedom and our privacy, not to build a digital cage of surveillance and control.